There is a reason why certain jobs are very, very popular in storytelling, like cops or judges or mobsters, right? It's because inherently these characters will come with different levels of conflict. Hi and welcome. If you've watched my previous video, we've talked about story and what is a story. And one of the foundational elements of a story, of a good story at least, is this idea of obstacles. Character has a goal and there are obstacles along the way. So that is what I want to hone in on today. Is talk about this idea of what obstacles are. When we think about an obstacle race, right, in the Olympics, what is that? It's a race where the athlete is trying to cross the finish line and has to jump over hurdles along the way. That's very close to what we're trying to do in storytelling. When we're thinking in terms of the obstacle race, though, all of these hurdles are physical obstacles, right? They're physical obstacles along the way between our character and his goal, which in my analogy is crossing the finish line. In storytelling, it's not always going to be physical hurdles along the way or physical obstacles. There are stories like that. There's a really great Pixar short called Knick Knack, in which a snowman is trying to get out of his snow globe to be with the girl of his dreams, right? So he has the goal to be with this girl, and he has one physical obstacle, which is the dome of his snow globe, whatever. And he's trying to get out of it through different strategies. That is not how every story is, right? Because when we're thinking in terms of storytelling, what are obstacles that aren't physical obstacles? Other characters, right? Other characters are many times in the way of our character, of our protagonist, and what he wants and what they want. This idea of a character trying to block our protagonist from achieving his goal is what we call conflict. Conflict is the heart of good storytelling. And what conflict means, it doesn't necessarily mean a fight or an argument, although those things are definitely filled with conflict. What conflict means is this idea of opposing desires. My character wants something, a different character wants something else. So let's break down this idea of conflict, because not all conflict is the same. There are what we call levels of conflict. And when we're first starting to think of our story, it's not a bad idea to think about what are some different kinds of conflict my character might have in this story. It's really important to take a little time to let your ideas percolate for a while before you really try to break them down. I'm going to break this down and we're going to talk about levels of conflict. As always, you can access all this teaching material in the website in the description of the video. So what you're looking at right now is this diagram that explores levels of conflict. So not all conflict is the same. So let's break these down one by one, and at the end we'll think of some examples, and we're going to think in practical ways how this is used in storytelling. So if we look at the smaller circle in the middle, the white circle, it says inner conflict. These are conflicts that our character has with themselves. So these could be conflicts of the mind, could be compulsive thoughts, could be addictions, could be not knowing what to do next. It could be conflicts of the body, pain, or body image issues. All these things fall under inner conflicts. And it could be uncontrollable emotions. Should I quit my job? Doubt, phobias. All these things where the character is struggling with their own decision making can fall under inner conflict. So let's think about a very, very classic film, which I will talk about endlessly on this channel, which is Jaws by Steven Spielberg. What are some of Brody's inner conflicts in the movie? For one, he is scared of the water, right? He's a cop on an island who is scared of the water. He also has these feelings of being an outsider, of being inadequate where he is. Those are inner conflicts that Brody has. So sometimes they're really hard to show in films, right? But they're important to be woven into the story to give our character some depth. So moving on to the next circle, we have what we call personal conflict. And these are some conflicts our character might have with other characters in their inner circle. Spouses, family members, kids, lovers. These are conflicts with the people that are closest to our character in their daily lives. This is no judgment in any way, but soap operas live very much in this world, and so do many sitcoms. And the reason why this is probably the most typical conflict in storytelling is because it is the most typical conflict in our lives. We do tend to have a lot of conflict. My kid wants to stay up late, but she has to go to sleep. Spouses that argue over who's supposed to take care of the dishes. All these things are very mundane, but they're very common in our lives, and they're about characters having conflict with other characters. So in our example, Jaws, Brody is constantly trying to get his kids not to go in the water, but they want to go in the water. His wife's trying to get him to relax and open up, and he kind of resents that because he's worried with this huge man-eating shark that's in the water in the village that he's supposed to protect. So that's an example of personal conflict. So let's go to the next circle, and this is extrapersonal conflict. If we look here, it says society, institutions, organizations, the law. These are conflicts that our character might have with people or organizations that are a little more far removed from his inner circle. So the boss, city hall, the cops, the law, the mafia, right? All these examples are examples of our character having conflict with a person or an institution that is a little far removed from our character. In many, many stories, these institutions or whatnot are personified in a character. So if we think of Jaws, right, there is the mayor. The mayor wants to keep the beaches open because it's really important for the economic health of this little town. So the mayor represents the town. The cop, the judge, they represent the law. The mafia is usually personified by a single character that represents the mob. In most examples, these characters, they represent something else. So let's move on, and we're going to talk about the last level of conflict before we think of certain examples of stories that use all of these. The last level of conflict is what I like to call godlike conflict. And I don't mean any disrespect to anybody. It's just this idea of these larger than life things that our character might come into contact with. We can think of monsters, machines, the environment, the weather, time. In my evergreen example of Jaws, Brody is fighting a shark, right? He is trying to kill the monster. So Transformers, that great movie, The Host, right? These are characters fighting actual monsters. There are movies in which the weather plays a big part, right? The Day After Tomorrow, they're fighting, right? Like The Day After Tomorrow, for example. Characters are fighting these larger than life elements. So, do all stories need all levels of conflict? Yes and no. It depends on the scope of your story. If you're writing a script for a YouTube video, you might not hit all of these levels. If you're writing a short film, you might not hit all these levels. But if we're thinking in terms of movies or TV shows, it might not be a bad idea. There is a reason why certain jobs are very, very popular in storytelling, like cops or judges or mobsters, right? It's because inherently these characters will come with different levels of conflict. So if I'm thinking about a story of a cop who's an alcoholic and is having troubles with his spouse and then has a case to solve, I've already hit 4 levels of conflict. He has an addiction that's causing trouble with someone in his personal life. He's trying to solve a case during a heat wave. There you go, 4 levels of conflict, right? So if we think about really, really popular TV shows, for example, of the last 20 odd years, 2 come to mind immediately. One is The Sopranos. In my very humble opinion, one of the greatest shows ever made. The Sopranos starts with Tony Soprano having panic attacks. Tony is the head of a mafia family, right? And his nephew, Christopher, is part of this family. He is both in his inner circle, Tony Soprano's inner circle, but he also represents part of his conflict with the mob side of the story. It's very complex. So he kind of represents both, and that's okay. There are ducks in his pool that he gets really sad when they leave. There's a bear in his backyard. There are these kind of nature-like things that tell us what he's going through that represent this larger-than-life idea. Another very, very popular show of the last few years is, of course, Breaking Bad, right? An iconic show that has spin-offs and whatnot. So let's think of Walter White. Walter White is dealing with a disease. He has cancer. He is fighting against his own body. He also feels really conflicted with the fact that he's not leaving his family any money. His wife is pregnant, he has a kid with cerebral palsy, and he is not leaving them in a good situation because he thinks he's going to die. Those are some of his inner conflicts. He also has constant conflict with his wife and his kid, right? So those are his personal conflicts. He is selling meth, so he's dealing with other drug dealers, with Gus and all these things. He has a brother-in-law who is in the DEA. So again, the same example as The Sopranos, where it's not cut and dry. It's both his inner circle and representing an institution, which is law enforcement, and then a plane falls from the sky. So when we are thinking of our own stories, it's not a bad idea to take a moment and think about what are certain conflicts my character might have. What are certain different conflicts that my character might have? That's going to give you ideas for scenes, for storylines, and it's going to make your story richer. If you like what you saw, please subscribe. Check out the website for some teaching material and more.